Hi, I'm Eleanor Lisney, also known as Tou Chui Wang. I started this podcast to explore identities, my own, with guests who share my ESEA, East and Southeast Asian identity, being from the East by heritage, and adopted and adopting by Western cultures. How do we adapt and negotiate? We get packaged together, but like an onion, we can take off layers when we peel. We have added identities such as being disabled, being women, and LGBTQ+. Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for taking time off on your busy life to come and have this podcast with me. And I thought let's start with having a bit of your background, because I know bits of it, but it's best if you sort of describe it yourself.
I'm mixed race, Singapore Chinese. My father was from Singapore. My mother's white British. I was born here. I grew up in the West Country. I didn't really have any direction at all. I ended up becoming an actor, which I suppose I've done reasonably successfully in the theatre. And then I kind of branched out and did a whole load of other things. I've written plays, I've written spoken word, I've written film scripts, I've directed short films, I play music, play in a band called Wondermare, and I work as a facilitator, sometimes director in drama schools and stuff. Yeah, so I've done quite a lot, I suppose.
I think I saw one of your full dramas, one morning one. The one I remember was about Chinese people who came to this country, and was it in the sort of labour?
Oh yeah, forgotten. The World War I Chinese Labour Corps. Yeah, I wrote a play based on that. Erased history, I suppose. It was successful, I suppose. It's published, people can buy it. It sold very well at the time. It sold to a lot of Asian people, it sold to a lot of Chinese people. I found a lot of the dialogue around it are quite uncomfortable. People would say it's commemorating the Chinese Labour Corps. I didn't want it to be a commemoration. I wanted it to feel like art, because that was my way into the story with them, really. Everyone was trying to do it at the time, and I'd already started doing the research, and I literally had to fight people off who wanted to get there ahead of me. And because it sounds easy, you go, oh yeah, the Chinese Labour Corps, and it's a bit like years ago I acted in a stage adaptation of Moby Dick at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and one of the reviews summed it up. It said, this is a really difficult book to adapt because a load of guys get in a boat to find a whale. So what do you do for 2 hours on stage? So it's a bit like that with the Chinese Labour Corps. A lot of Chinese guys come from Shandong to work, in the trenches, behind the lines in World War I. Yeah, great. So what do you do with that? What do? Do you have them sitting around the trench going, oh, Lao, it's so far from home? I don't know. So my way into it was actually I kind of did a load of research, and I found out that a lot of them, and they were uneducated, working class peasants, I suppose, not literate, couldn't read, couldn't write, and they were incredibly artistic though. I found pictures of them doing performances for each other in these extraordinary costumes that I've never seen anywhere, and they carried musical instruments with them, and they played music for each other, they told stories, and they did incredible engravings on bombshells and stuff like that. They decorated their quarters. Their quarters were given a really racist name, trigger warning, the CH word, camp, by the British. And they would sell trinkets as well. And they were incredibly artistic, and I just thought that's what the play's about. Really, it's about story. It's about art. It's about that stuff lives in all of us, whether we're educated or not. And so often it's the preserve of middle class elites, and that's what I wanted to make the play about. And also how seismic it was in terms of world history, let alone Chinese history, because a lot of people just don't get that. It's so erased that the Chinese Labour Corps were a desperate kind of card played by a struggling Chinese Republican government. Probably the only time China really attempted democracy, and they were on their knees, and they wanted a seat at the post-war peace conference so they could bargain with the world and get the copious amounts of debts they owed from the Opium War, get this all paid off and get back on their feet. So they said, what we have in China is labour. We have a workforce, so here you can have them. And they were paid, but not enormous amounts of money. And they came. They absolutely helped win the war. If you imagine at that point, there's a myth about World War One that Britain, that we the Brits, we won World War One. It didn't happen at all. Basically, two sides were at it for 4 years, and until one of them collapsed from exhaustion. And you have to imagine what that was like when you had for the Germans, when you already had the Americans come, and then at the 11th hour, 135,000 strapping, big Shandong farmers rock up to dig trenches and repair tanks and do all that stuff behind the lines that they were having to expend labour on. It was a massive moment in history, and so much came out of it as well. That the whole idea of China being literate came out of that. It came out of YMCA workers going into the trenches and working with the Labour Corps, trying to teach them to read and write, and realising that we have this problem in China that people can't read, can't write, they can't write to each other, they can't. So it was a huge thing, and I wanted to make it very artistic, and wanted to make it about Chinese theatre as well, because that was the other thing that came out, and that's where the title came from, The End Forgotten, because there's a book about Yuan dynasty drama. It's the purpose of theatre is to preserve the ghosts of the past. And I just thought that's it, really. They are like ghosts, and they vanished, and we want to try and bring them back. So I talked a lot about that, but it just came up when you mentioned it there. That's what it was. It was, Anyway, it's published by Oberon. You can order it online, I think. Bloomsbury now, I think the publisher is. You can order it online and read it. You can watch it online somewhere.
I've got it. I've got the book, and I've been to the play. Don't think I watch it online. But come back to sort of the theme that I wanted to talk about in this podcast is, just to start with, I was absolutely thrilled to learn that you were reading one of Jin Yong's books. I think you only did one of them because I can't find any of the others.
No, there are 4.
There are 4?
Audiobooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done 4.
But on Amazon, there's only one that was listed, and I bought it.
Oh, no, you have to go on Audible.
Yeah, I was on Audible.
Yeah, no, there's 4.
Okay.
I've done 4.
So, I haven't finished.
Maybe 5, actually. I'm sorry.
I haven't finished listening to it.
Yeah. Well, they're very long.
I know. It's like 13 hours or something like that. Just one book. And I was thrilled because, first of all, I'm not very good at book reading. And it's not just because I'm a very slow reader, but it's also because books are heavy.
Yeah.
So it's lovely when you can just hear somebody doing it. And also because when you read a book, and when I listen to you reading it, I've got an incredibly bad memory. I can't remember the names of the people in it.
Yeah.
So I sort of like cheat. I read a bit of the book, I listen to a bit, and I watch it on television. I watch it as a Chinese drama. And the one that I'm specifically talking about here is a hero born, I think it's called.
Yeah, A Hero Unborn.
A hero born, I think it was.
I don't remember the individual titles, you see, really. I just remember, Legends of the Condor.
The first book, which Gigi Chang has translated. She translated it all. Most of them. I mean, collaboration with some of them. But I was really, really thrilled because Jin Yong is the sort of Wuxia empire, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was young, I felt very, very deprived because you were talking about illiterate Chinese. Well, I'm not of that era, but I'm illiterate Chinese all the same.
Yeah.
I went to an English-speaking school. Everything was taught in English. But I was sent off as a disabled child to my grandparents. And the only access I had to Wuxia and those type of stories were audible because my grandparents had a thing called the rediffusion, in which every hour they would have stories that were serialized. And I listened to a lot of Jin Yong type stories and the Monkey God stories on that. So I felt very deprived. And you were brought up here. I was brought up in Malaysia. And if I can go on a little bit, a lot of my ideas about not just Wuxia, about feminism, about ableism, about gender fluidity, is from Wuxia stories. I won't name all of them, but people I can remember like Cheng Pei Pei and all these veteran actors, because like I said, I had no access to Chinese literature, and my only access was through Chinese films. And because I studied English and American literature, I've got a master's in English literature, so it was just that. But to go back to Wuxia, I was wondering how you came about reading this book by Jin Yong.
I knew Gigi before. She's an amazing translator. I mean, her knowledge of written Chinese and English is extraordinary, because there's always an issue with translations, as you probably do. You know what I mean? There are brilliant things written in the Chinese language, and no one's ever translated them properly. I'm convinced of it. It's very, very hard. And I've been told, because I've got very interested in Chinese philosophy in the last few years and written dramas based on it. I'm told that people in China can't actually read the Analects, Confucius. They can't actually read them the way, because it's like reading Chaucer, yeah. Not even Shakespeare, yeah, Chaucer. It's that bizarre. So I did know Gigi, but I don't know if that. But I think I had to do a test. I think they sent me a bit. I remember the bit now. Is Lotus Huang's encounter with some of the more villainous characters, and she was such a great character. She just kind of leapt off the page.
Yeah.
And I had to read, I don't know, 4 pages of it, record it. I think I recorded it on my phone, I don't know. And I sent it off, and then they asked me to do it. And I knew at that time they were saying like the second one will be ready as well very soon. So I more or less was booked to do 2 of them. And then I've just tried to make it my mission to get back and do them ever since, to be honest. I mean, I think there's 11 books in the whole series, I don't know, but yeah, I'd love to take it all the way through to the end if I live that long. But I mean, yeah, it was strange because I've done them. The pandemic, they kind of bookended the pandemic in a way. So I travelled up to a studio in Leicester to do the first one, and I think the second or the third, I can't remember. I recorded in my home. One of the things I did at the beginning of lockdown was I converted this tiny store cupboard we got into a sort of recording studio. It was like nailing duvets. I came back, I got off the plane from Singapore, jet lagged, and we went to lockdown, and my agent was going, "Oh, somebody wants to do an audio book," and I don't know. I mean, I said I tried. So I ordered this microphone, and I was nailing duvets and pillows to this cover, thinking I was jet lagged, thinking you're insane. This is not going to work, and it kind of did. Though it's laborious, you kind of have to do it 3-4 in the morning and stuff. So one of them I definitely did in my cupboard, and one of them I remember travelling up to Leicester to do in the depths of lockdown when things were just. But it was like the train up there was like a ghost train, and I was in a hotel, and it was me and some homeless people in the hotel. So weirdly, it was the friendliest hotel I've ever stayed in, actually. And they've just been amazing to do ever since, really. I mean, they are very long. It's obviously hard work. There's a lot of very complicated names in it. Complicated.
I mean, there's so many characters
So
in it.
huge.
It's just like, you know, I can't ever get hold of it. And I think it's because maybe I'm more graphic, visual. I need the visual thing. So I depend a lot, and I say depend because I think I still depend on the 2017 version of it. The 2017 version starred Yang Su-wen and Li Yitong. I know Li Yitong. But Yang Su-wen, he was a young lad at that time, 2017, more than 5 years ago. I think it was the first time I actually sat down and sort of watched it because I waited for it to come out. And it was amazing because this is the first time I really encountered Jin Yong. And this is before the books came out, I think. And I had to rewatch some of them because I couldn't remember all the characters. I remember, what's his name? The main character, Gojin and Lotus, his character. And this is the sort of first time I actually wandered into the Wuxia world, even though I started it when I was a child. Like I said, you know, the first time I learned properly about what is feminism, even before I knew what the term was, I think one of the most important things for me about Wuxia is to learn that you can be a warrior even as a disabled person.
Yeah.
And even as a woman.
Yeah, definitely.
And also where there is the sort of gendered fluidity from the Swordsman and what Bridget Lin did. And it was like also because I grew up with Cantonese opera. And to me, it was like nothing. That why would you have a woman play a man playing a, you know, in a role that required sort of acrobatics and stuff like that. It was just natural to me that until I came here, I didn't realize that it wasn't a common thing, you know.
Yeah.
And I first encountered it through Wuxia, which a lot of people might not understand. It's a sort of like a underground kind of work. I suppose it's like a sort of bonding of common thoughts, although there are bad people also in Wuxia. It's a bit like somebody said, it's a bit like Robin Hood's world. You know, and you have the sheriff and all that, but it's a sort of parallel world because you don't think of the sort of the existence of court and paperwork type world that you encounter in your normal life, but you can go and escape into. I'm not explaining it very well. Do you want to help here?
What? I mean, everything you say there, I mean, is absolutely true of the book. There are disabled characters who are fearsome fighters. There are women who are fearsome fighters. In fact, I mean, I would say hands out my favourite character in the whole series is probably Cyclone May, who's blind. I think
she's a badass woman.
I mean, but also incredible history, incredible backstory. That there's one. I mean, this is what I love about the books. There's these fight sequences that go on for 8-9 chapters, when one character will narrate their history, and there's an extraordinary bit in I think book 2 where we go back to her youth and her childhood and being on the island with Apothecary Huang, Lotus Huang's father, and just an extraordinary depth of character. It's just amazing. And there is, I think we were sort of talking about this before we got on. There's an element of magic in it. There's no kind of creatures, but I do think the characters are magical and their fights are magical. The stuff they can do is magical. You know, the lightness breathing and the fact they can kind of walk in.
I mean, people only encountered that in sort of Hidden Dragon and and what's it, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Yeah. But we've had that. You know, people think, you know, people who can jump out on roofs and things like that. I mean, that's comparatively new. I don't know if that's invented by Jin Yong or not.
I don't know if it's invented by Jin Yong as such, but I think it comes out of that genre. I think that's quite an old genre. Certainly, Marsh Tales, The Water Margin is the series that I watched when I was a kid, as it's called. There's elements of that in it. They're sort of super fighters. And
Shaolin warriors. Yeah.
I mean, it is an interesting thing. I think it's such a part of Chinese culture. There was in the Boxer Rebellion, which, you know, for those of you who don't know listening, which was late 19th century China, late 19th century Qing Empire, let's call it its proper name, which was crumbling and heavily colonized. Bits of it were colonized by Western powers. It was a kind of uprising of people who would tie red headbands on themselves, and they thought they were impervious to bullets.
Taiping Rebellion.
But they thought they were impervious to bullets, which is fact. And they did cause a lot of trouble to the British, the Americans, the French. They were really alarmed by this. But one of the things is they actually thought they were magical. They thought they were impervious to bullets, and of course they would go into battle, and that wasn't the case. And there was one Qing kind of high official who sort of said, I think a lot of this can be blamed on the reading materials that because I think they read picture books, and they sort of had this idea that they were kind of magical creatures who could do all this. And I got that in the play I was talking about, Forgotten, the World War I Chinese Labour Corps. I got that in. I was quite taken by that idea. So there's a character in it called Eunuch Lin, and they say, look, you know, if we go to this war, you know, the Western powers, they've got these huge weapons, you know, when we be killed? And Eunuch Lin says, no, we won't be killed, because we're the magical Chinese and they can't kill us. And we'll carry our story, we'll carry our theatre, and the Westerners will be entranced by us. And, you know, it's quite a touching moment for me. But the gender bending, I think it is quite interesting, because there's been a real thing in the last 10 years or so in British theatre about women playing men and stuff like that. And you're right, and I only learned this from research, really. That's always gone on in Chinese theatre. That's just always been a thing. So nobody has any issues with it, really. And so hence a lot of performers come here from places like Malaysia, Singapore, China, and young male identifying, and they want to do drag, and they want to do female characters on stage. And people are saying you can't really do that in Britain, and they're like,
well, Shakespeare did it.
Yeah, no, Shakespeare didn't. That's what Shakespeare totally did it. But there's a thing now, I think, where people have got on about the gender imbalance in British theatre. So the idea that a man can play a woman's part these days is just no. You know, that's just kind of like forbidden in a way, because there was a whole thing about balancing it up. But I think a lot of people who are from a Chinese background just don't understand that, because they're just going, but this is always, you know, that's what we do. We play each other, and no one cares.
Yeah, and nobody cares. You can be a man, play a woman plays a man, and
also you can be an old man and play a young woman.
As my cousin is. I mean, he's a middle-aged man now, and he plays an old woman.
Yeah.
Well, because he can't play a pretty woman on the stage in Cantonese opera. I mean, he sings.
No, but some of them do, don't they? They go on and on. They go on and on playing those roles, and yeah.
I mean, it's nothing to us. I mean, that's why it's not just Wuxia, but the stories, not just Jin Yong, but Wang Fei Hong, and, you know, all those sort of martial arts. I mean, you know, people do watch them, but I try to introduce them to my Western friends, and I'm not sure they that they get more and more get them because more and more are used to reading subtitles now.
Yeah.
But again, the Wuxia holds a special place in my heart is because even when I was a child, I watched The One-Armed Swordsman.
Yeah.
And, all these sort of characters that had this, and blind samurais.
Yes.
And, there's no equivalent in the Western cinema or even dramas. I mean, right now, I'm waiting for the second season for Joy of Life, which I don't think you've seen. I might be wrong.
No, I haven't seen it.
But this is Zhang Ruowen. He played, and it's fascinating because there's sci-fi included into it. And it's a story about a child that has the brain of a grown-up. But he was put into this kind of place and stage where he actually sort of, it happens to him, and then he finds out his mother might be an alien and all that sort of stuff. But in the same story, the guy who's sort of in charge of the equivalent of the CIA is a guy in a wheelchair. And he holds the power. And we don't actually see the excess stuff, although there are ramps and things. Obviously, he's in a wheelchair. He needs to, But to see a badass character played, well, he's not disabled himself, but he plays character as a wheelchair user. And then there's his uncle, a warrior, who's a blind top martial arts. It's a sort of representation that you don't see elsewhere. And in a way, you need to have that case of Wuxia for it to work. Previously, we had Ironside and things like that. But how else could you have like a badass disabled person playing like the head of the CIA? It's not quite possible, maybe. I mean, although his disability was, he didn't grow up. He had to fight and he lost the use of his legs. But that sort of thing can only happen there. And I'm just wondering, what can we build out of them, if anything? And how can we bring that into the sort of consciousness of British East and Southeast Asian people? Do we need to? I mean, I just considered it's so, I think it's an important part of our heritage.
Yeah, definitely.
And,
well, I mean, in fairness, it's definitely an important part of, I say this word, Chinese. I mean, it's a weird word.
No,
really, but it definitely comes out of that. I don't know if people, it's the same thing in Filipino culture. I don't know. There probably is something similar.
I'm talking about East Asian because you have it in Korea, you have it in Japan, and well, the blind samurai is Japanese.
Blind samurai. Yeah, I think on a certain level, and I did say this, and somebody said how you described Jin Yong, and I said to me it's like the Chinese Tolstoy, because there's that epic sweep of landscape and history and vast panoramas of characters. And war, and he writes very well about war. He writes very well.
And minorities.
Yeah, minorities and civil war as well, civil conflict and
domestic conflict.
Yes, yeah, and that's kind of, but there is something intrinsic to East Asian. It's a certain type of East Asian. I suppose. I mean, there are things that obviously like I don't know, in Britain. I suppose there's the Knights of the Round Table and stuff like that. It's kind of got that thing. I think those things are probably there in all places, in all cultures, but there's a certain. Tolstoy
is Russian.
Yeah, I know. but there's a certain, and also a much more realistic writer in so many ways. But I was thinking just more of the epic sweep of it, and the whole thing about war and peace and how do you make peace. But I mean, I think there's a certain martial element. It's a particular kind of East Asian martial element, I think, which is kind of runs through all that stuff, which is kind of unique to that part of the world, I think. And in many ways, me growing up here, it's something I connect with from a distance. I wouldn't say I really grew up with it culturally. I didn't, and I suspect that's similar of a lot of British-born East and Southeast Asian people. We don't really grow up with this stuff.
No.
You know, and it was a strange thing when I first became an actor. You know, you go into these dreadful casting calls to play Chinese characters, and there was a sense that people who knew about that stuff, people who'd grown up with that stuff, that was cultural cachet that would, you know, could be used to garner a job. You know, it very much to garner an acting role. And I didn't really have that, and so I did a lot of work learning about it. And it wasn't all work. A lot of it was. It's very fascinating, and I'm very kind of fascinated with Chinese history and Chinese literature, Chinese theatre, all that. I'm just completely taken with it, really. But it was something I only came to in adulthood. Like when you mentioned the one-armed swordsman just then, my kind of route into that kind of cinema, the BFI. Doing a season, and these are the days when I could spend time watching a film every night or 2 films a night, and watched all of them, and watched the One-Armed Swordsman, but the one that really hooked me in, and it's still now probably one of my top 10 films of all time, King Hu, A Touch of Zen.
Oh yeah, I remember watching that. I was at uni.
Just couldn't take my eyes off the screen, and it's long and it goes on and on and on.
And slow.
But it's always like 4 films in one film in a way, but side-splittingly hilarious, acrobatic, dazzling kind of choreography, fights, some very silly, brilliant comedy, but also something quite profound and spiritual. And it stayed with me really, and that's why when Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out and people were going gaga over it, I couldn't, because I just thought he's just shot for shot recreated King Hu. For me, I just thought that's what he's done. I could see the shots and all that kind of walking across the trees.
on the bamboo.
Yeah,
all
those fights and stuff like that. But you know, it very much was, especially being mixed race. It was you know, it was me finding a part of myself that was buried in many ways, and I don't really embody that. I don't feel comfortable saying, I can't identify as a Chinese person. I find that deeply weird, you know. If people say, when people still got the Chinese community, before it was East and Southeast Asian, people would say am I part of the Chinese community? I don't think so. You know, I can't look people in the eye and say I'm Chinese. I can't really look people in the eye and say I'm British. Well, British more so, just because we're a multicultural society, but
it's a nationality.
It's a nationality where and that's the issue with China. I think it's very much kind of got that thing of an ethno state, which of course it isn't. There's minorities there. There's all sorts, but
you're Han Chinese.
Yeah.
That I mean, I get that. I get very defensive when people say you're Chinese. I say no, I'm not. No. Ethnically, I'm Chinese, but I'm not by nationality. No. I'm not Chinese. But the one person that came out of Crouching Tiger for me that made an impression is Cheng Pei Pei.
Oh yeah. Well,
and she plays the Jade Crow, Jade something. So badass.
Yeah. And
so, you know, people don't even say it, but she's obviously got mental health issues. You know, and it's because of the kind of life that she's led, the kind of oppression that she's had as a woman. But nobody's actually written it. Maybe one day when I get the time, I'll go write something about how impressive that character is. And for me, that's the main character, because she's the one who brought Zhang Yiji's character up, the person who made it what she is, but nobody has actually pointed that out, that it's her influence But also I remember more than Jin Yong's books is the whole, I don't know if you watch Once Upon a Time in China.
Yeah.
With Jet Li.
Jet Li, yeah.
You know, and I think it's from all the martial arts. It's more films and dramas that get me because of the choreography, of the actual fight scenes. And Wang Gawei's the something master. Can't remember which master it is. The only one I think he did, which was with martial arts, and it's Tony Leung.
Tony Leung, yeah, one of his earlier films, isn't it?
Yeah, and he spent 3 years, Tony Leung, learning martial arts to do that film. Apparently.
Well, I read that when they did Happy Together, that Tony Leung shaved his moustache off so he couldn't go back and reshoot anymore. Because it went on and on and on.
About how many bowls of wonton noodles he had to eat.
Yeah. It's obviously very cinematic, so it was. I mean, because it came from books originally, so I was quite intrigued by that. But the fight descriptions in Jin Yong are extraordinary, and reading them aloud and dramatising them for people to listen to. It's a lot of work, obviously, because it's quite.
I can't visualize some of them.
No, some of them I can't. My favourite, I think, is Exploding Toad Fist.
Oh,
which is where you can punch someone and it does something inside, so that they'll drop dead in 6 months' time. I just think that's which Viper Ouyang I think specialises in. There's those little tricks they've all got. There's the one that Guojing learns off Zhou Guotong, which is the two hands. I could not get my head around it at all.
That's one this guy who holds up this kind of cauldron or whatever.
Yeah.
And walks. I'm going that. That's like beyond. You know, all the tricks. Yeah, but some of it just go flash by me because I can't comprehend them.
No.
And then they go so fast that you don't stay. And,
no.
And watch. One of the things that Gigi, when we had chats, and she was telling me she's getting more conscious about descriptions of disability.
Yeah.
That she might kind of like, you know, because it's not obvious when it's written. But when she's translating, she said she'd spend more effort in sort of realizing it and putting it in. And it's not just that character you mentioned, that fierce, blind sort of bird kind of.
Cyclone May, yeah.
Yeah. And that the other blind guy, the teacher.
The blind bat, yeah.
No, not the bat. The one of Gojin's masters.
The seven free curtain.
Yes,
Yeah.
One of them is. Yeah. I mean, he's like a really mixed character, because I can't actually say he's a good character because some of the things he does.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's certainly quite dark.
Yeah.
And he's the one that stays on into the next series of books.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. He's very dark. I mean, that's what I love about the books. Is there's a lot of nuance there, and friends become enemies, become friends, which is really extraordinary. You definitely and the way I think it takes Gorging into quite a conflicted area around Kublai Khan, who essentially is trying to invade China.
Yeah,
it's just very, very interesting.
And I think Gorging in the second series, where it's all about not Gorging's son, but the other guy's son, what's his name?
Yang Kang's son, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his kind of characters changes a bit.
Yeah.
And the characters Gorging and Lotus, and then the second series, they kind of become more kind of straight characters and they lose their kind of edginess, if you want to call it that.
Gorging and notice, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they do. They become the parental figures in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of all those kind of nuances and how you have to kind of grow with the story.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I mentioned, and I don't know if you watch any of the adaptations.
I've only seen glimpses, and I don't really want to watch one now because I'm sort of midway through the series, maybe.
Yeah.
Doing it, and also I don't know. I when I've seen bits, I've never been taken by the way it looks on screen. To me, that there's a world I imagine in my head, and it never looks quite. It just doesn't look the way I imagine it to look. And I've been the same like that with all of them. Marsh Tales as well, which I've read copiously. Three Kingdoms. I find it difficult to watch. I did watch. Is it Red Cliff? Yeah, I found it difficult to watch.
No, I can understand that.
The characterization, the portrayal of like Zhuge Liang or whatever. Zhuge Liang is probably one of my favourite characters in all literature. This is a character in Three Kingdoms who's like this master magical battle strategist, extreme brain, but again, enormous sense of melancholy. And when I see him depicted on screen, I just go, nah, it just doesn't sit with me really. I just have a way I imagine it in my head. But I'm often like that with books, to be honest.
I'm like that, but it's because I don't read anything in Chinese.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch like Far From the Madding Crowd or anything that I've studied. I can't watch that on screen because I walked out the cinema. I remember that. But I think at the beginning I mentioned Nirvana in Fire.
Yeah.
And that is the Chinese drama that had pulled me into Chinese drama.
Yeah, I've watched quite a bit of that, yeah.
The idea of Mei Chuang-su, who is in the Wuxia, but he's disabled, although in China he wouldn't be said as disabled because apparently chronic fatigue is not something that they would call disabled in China. But it's something that I have. And it's like, man, he's the strategist. I wouldn't exactly say he's a goody-goody, but the power, the kind of story that they weave around that character, it's huge on me. And when we talk about representation as a disabled character, because at that time, I don't know if you know it, at that time when Huga was picked as the person to play, people said he's the obvious guy to play it because he just had a huge accident that had disfigured him in some way. And also a lot of that kind of story about Mei Chuang-su applied to him.
Yeah.
So in a sense, like, he's not exactly a disabled person, but he was like a disabled person, if you see what I mean, who played the character. And for me, there's no other role that Hooker can play that is better than that. People talk about the Shanghai Blossoms and all that. I haven't seen it. I'm not impatient to see it. They said he was fantastic in it. Yeah, but as you say, your brain gets settled.
Yeah.
And for me, the role is Mei Chuang-su and nobody else. It's weird. It shouldn't be like that, right? As an actor, you know.
Yeah, but then it might be better to have one thing that defines that's better in the public consciousness of people who watched it. It's better to do one of those things and never do any of those things, I'd say. I know some actors get very angry when they get connected with a certain role, but I think you have to count yourself fortunate if you create something that people connect with in that way, that to them you are that person. That must be, you know, I don't know if I've ever really done it, because I kind of work in the theatre, and I kind of very much kind of move around a lot, you know, and do different things all the time. But to have that kind of exposure in one particular role, I think, you know, a lot of actors dread that in a way, and when they start, I think they crave it initially, and then when it happens, they resent it. But I do think you have to look and think, well, that's landed with people, and that is something. That's a huge thing.
We talk about acting, we talk about, you know, representation and all that. I've only sort of recently come, because of you and because of other ESEA people that I know, East and Southeast Asian people that I know, is about acting as a disabled person or as an East Asian. I say East Asian because that's where I am, or East and Southeast Asian. And I know that I don't consider it. I think being intersectional, being disabled, being Asian, being Southeast Asian, being, you know. And another one is age.
Yeah.
I think if I've started off when I was much younger, I might be more open to it. First of all, I don't think there's any roles that call for a disabled, older, Southeast Asian woman, unless I write the play myself. That there isn't. So I was thinking, you know, should we encourage that sort of intersectionality? Because I was asked, I think it was a disability law course in Ireland, to talk about intersectionality. I think the trouble with being intersectional, although it sounds great, maybe for funding, but you'd find that if you're intersectional, you're invited to many tables to eat.
Yeah.
The trouble is you don't fit into any of them.
No.
For example, if you're disabled, you go in because you're a woman of colour. You don't quite fit in because you're a woman of colour. You go into another one that's a sort of as a person of colour, then you don't quite fit in because you're a disabled person. That, you know, that's the sort of problem when you're intersectional. And I said this is a random question. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts of that, you know, then... You know.
Well, in a sense, this is why I don't really like the word representation very much anymore, because and this is why I've written a play that's going to be on at Soho Theatre June the 20th. July. Yeah, no, June the 20th, I think it opens. It goes on for a month at Soho Theatre. It's called The Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience, because when there was this kind of like, you know, and I was heavily involved in that kind of uprising in 2013, which went all across different intersectionalities. It went all across disabled people. It went, you know, women, gender, you know. But particularly I felt like with East and Southeast Asians, because we were locked off the screens, locked off the stages to a great, you know, to a huge extent. People had no qualms about casting white people as us. So when we kind of like, when we rebelled and sort of forced our way into the kind of theatrical consciousness anyway, that there was a sense that like we were saying we want representation, but I don't know what I would represent really, and there's been this enormous pressure on me as a writer to write something representative. There was, I mean, that film that came out last year, Past Lives. There's a guy called Jin Yong. He's a writer, critic.
It's lovely film.
Well, he wrote a rather brilliant piece about that film. He doesn't like the film very much.
No,
I mean, you know, I don't have an issue with that. A lot of people they get very upset. They go, you know, how can you But he wrote something about the fact that it ticks all the boxes. You know, you get the shot of the chopsticks. You get that there is this absolute sense that you have to show something that's. There was a thing where like when we were doing Forgotten, there was a lot of because the main characters were an amateur theatre troupe in rural China in the early 20th century. And there was a sense like there was one Chinese person who watched it and they went, "Oh, your opera's not right." And I went, "No." And then she went, "Yeah, you needed a teacher." And I went, "No, I deliberately said we're not having a teacher." And when we worked out Quan Kian Van, who did the movement, he said to me, "Can we invent our own?" I said, "Yeah, I think we've got to do that. I just don't believe in that kind of
correctness.
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe in imitation. I don't like it. And all those things really, and it's all those films that have come out in the last few years that people go, I saw myself, Crazy Rich Asians, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Whatever. I mean, some of them I enjoy, some of them I don't. But I never think, well, that's me up there. I never ever think that. And Michelle Yeoh said that. She said for what this means for people who look like me. And I was thinking, you don't look like me, Michelle. You don't. No disrespect, but you don't look like me. And it took me. Look. It took me 20, 30 years to watch the Joy Luck Club. I'd never seen it.
I don't think I've... Oh, yes, I have.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it took lockdown. I was really, really... And I found it on YouTube and I watched it. And, again, it's not my world. It's not my story.
It's American.
It's very... No, we often get sucked into that. We get sucked into that idea in Britain. What British theatre loves to do is Asian American plays. And you get like... East and Southeast Asian people go and say, yeah, that's our story. And it's not your story. It just is not your story. That's not the life we live. We don't have those massive communities. When I've been to America, I've been to New York Chinatown, San Francisco Chinatown. I hung out in LA with Asian American actors. And it's just a different world. They have these huge, you go through K-Town, Los Angeles. It's as big as Greenwich. We just don't have anything like that. We grew up in isolation from each other. So it's not our story. So there is a sense when you were saying about there is no female Southeast Asian disabled character. No, there isn't. We don't have that diversity of experience, a diversity of representation, if you like. And it reminded me one exchange I had with a BBC commissioner, the head of series at the BBC. They did this series a few years ago called One Child. Terrible series. I don't care. You don't edit this out. It's awful. It's absolutely shockingly bad. And I remember, and they were seeing actors at the time, and they were going, they must be Chinese and they must speak Mandarin. And of course, they cast a load of actors in it who can't speak Mandarin. Of course, they always do that. And I remember the head of series at BBC writing to me, "I hope you'll see this as a brilliant opportunity for the East Asian acting community, Daniel." I said, "No, it's not. It's not. It's a possible opportunity for people who you think look Chinese." And then I heard later on they did a nightclub scene and they're the background artists and they were pulling background artists out saying, "You have to go home because you look too mixed race, it doesn't look right." And I brought that up with the head of series and I went there on behalf of Equity and she went, "Well, it's not a documentary, Daniel. We don't have footnotes. People have to look a certain way," which is well, that just says it all, really. So that representation. Somebody wrote this. You're not being represented. You're being marketed to. That is a trick that people pull.
I like that.
You have to support this film because it's us, and it isn't. It isn't. It just isn't. It isn't us. It isn't we. Now, I am so much about opportunity. I believe everyone should have the opportunity to make stories, to create stories, share those stories, and we shouldn't have to be a certain type of person to connect with those stories. I think you should have a drama about a disabled Southeast Asian woman, and everyone should be able to watch that. Everyone should be able to connect into it. But the idea, and this is why award ceremonies to me are just a joke now. We have these awards, these film awards. They go on for months. There's so many of them, and it's all the same films that win them. It's Oppenheimer wins it again and again and again. And then you see everyone on social media going, "Oh, well, they didn't give anything to past lives," and "Oh, the lack of feet." Because it becomes about that. And what's brilliant about it is you cannot please everybody. You just can't. So what you should try and do is make good drama, but you should also have equality of opportunity, and that's the difference. So when people are saying it has to be a Chinese person who writes this script or it won't be authentic, I don't really believe that. I think anyone who's a good writer can write it, but it's about opportunity. Someone who's of East Asian heritage should get that opportunity, and for you know, since time we haven't had that here. We've not had those opportunities. So how do you become a really good writer or a really good actor? You need opportunities. You need to be doing it. And people from certain backgrounds get those opportunities, and people who aren't don't a lot of the time still. And that's what it's about for me. It's not about authenticity. It's not about seeing myself. It's not about anything like that. It's just about people being able to have opportunities to tell stories and to make those stories vibrant and real and connect.
Yeah. I'm going to say something that probably need to be taken out.
Go on.
It's this thing about, you have to be a wheelchair user to play a wheelchair user or whatever. And I'm going like, you have to be good.
Yeah. I know, I totally agree. But the only thing I'd say there is, like I said, that
it has to be the opportunity.
Yeah. Wheelchair using actors don't get that many opportunities.
Yeah.
So of course, this is what happened when they get a brilliant role like My Left Foot. They go, oh well, who can we get? We'll get Daniel Day-Lewis because we've seen him doing all these amazing things. Whereas the wheelchair user actor hasn't been seen, hasn't had those opportunities. That's what I'd say about that. But no, I actually do believe anyone can play anything in a certain setting. But it's just some people get to play it more than others. That's the problem.
Yeah, I get that a lot. But I always say that, to me, people have to have the opportunity to grow and to learn like everybody else.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be dropped into a role just because you're a wheelchair user. But if you're a wheelchair user who's been through all the training of being a proper actor, I mean, say proper, inverted commas, but you can't just drop somebody to play something if they've not had the right training.
But I don't think in Britain today you have to do that, because I can think of several very brilliant wheelchair user actors.
Oh, I know them, and they definitely are. But I suppose I'm thinking more about in different countries. Yeah. Not in England, we have that opportunity. You can, because that's reasonable adjustment and sort of things. I mean, the one thing that people argue with me about was a specific film done in India. There is a brilliant film in Japan, and the person was played by a wheelchair user, her first time, and she did it brilliantly. As I said, it needs to be good.
Yeah.
And the trouble with the big brands or whatever, Hollywood, Bollywood, BBC, whatever is in England, the trouble is that if they don't have the name, how can you make sure that the right audience watch it?
Well, the name thing's quite interesting. I think that's what they've generally used to keep people out, and then
I know, yeah.
It kind of ran amok on things like, Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell. No one wanted to see it, and actually it's quite interesting. I think we're in an age now where the age of the movie star is kind of gone in many ways. The reality was there was only ever a handful of genuinely bankable screen actors that would actually get people into the cinema. And then, even then, their cachet goes down. If people go 3-4 times and the film's not very good, they won't come back again. And apparently all those Marvel films, the studios love them because, in a sense, they supersede the stars. Because sometimes you take those actors out of the costumes, and I read an article about that, and they don't sell so well. And they do this in the theatre a lot. They'll take a TV star and put them in a regional tour of Billy Liar or something, and they end up having to cancel performances because no one turns up. Oh. I think in the theatre, if you want to fill the National Theatre, you've got to get one of the Doctor Who's on there or something. There's a fundamental inequality in the industry where it tends to be white, middle class, able-bodied, who have the best acting opportunities and build their profile as an actor. Whereas I still think people of colour too often, especially East and Southeast Asians, we're kind of tokenistic, exotic. Every now and then, like, you could get one East and Southeast Asian affair, and everyone go, "Oh, that's nice, that's really nice." But do they really want to see him do anything else? I don't know if the audience genuinely wants to a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? And that's the type of roles they're playing. That's the type. Are they allowed to be compelling? I genuinely do believe you take the. I saw a thing. I only saw the headline the other day. The actress in Past Lives. She said, I can't go back to doing bit parts. And you think, yeah, I can see that after doing that film. There's no way you should be going back to doing bit parts. And you would like to think someone's watched that film and seen her kind of Chekhovian, understated emotional life and think, well, no, we could cast her in a lot of things. You would like to think that would happen. I don't know. I heard that after Everything Everywhere All at Once, Ke Kien.
I've not seen
well,
that film.
When the film was getting edited, he didn't have another job at all. That to me is the brilliant thing about that film. It kind of took someone who's quite unusual in many ways. I mean, he hadn't worked for years and years, apparently, as an actor. And I can understand why, because he doesn't really fit an exotic stereotype at all. And, you know, but it was quite interesting. He took that job after years out. And I think even when it wrapped, he was like, I don't know if I'll get another one. And people will argue that that's the way it is for actors. But I think people from certain mainstream backgrounds, I don't know, it's a little bit easier. And a little bit more, there's more of a career path.
I'm thinking, what's his name? Crazy Rich Asians.
Henry Golding.
Henry Golding has sort of stepped out of it a bit.
Yeah,
but
okay, you might have to take this out, but he's really not a very good actor.
It doesn't really matter because he's there. I mean, how many... Give him kudos for getting there. That's all I can say. I'm not saying he's a great actor.
I will say this, though. I will say the interesting thing about him, though, and especially in Crazy Rich Asians, because there's a lot of flack, and it still goes on social media about the fact he got that role in the first place, because he's not in any way, shape, or form Chinese. And I will say this, it was an Asian film director who cast him. I think, had that been a white person making that film, he'd look at that guy and think, well, he's mixed race, and he's not Chinese.
Oh,
I can't cast.
Fuck that.
No,
he's a proper Malaysian.
That's what I'm saying. To me, because you know, I know people in Singapore who are Crazy Rich Asians. I know people who are that character that he plays, and to me, he suits that character far more than someone who was.
I was so angry, and I fought with people who said, "Oh, you know that stupid comment by Simu Liu."
Oh, which one was that?
He was saying that
he's made a few.
He's not my favourite.
No.
He said something about the fact that what's his name, Golding, only got the job because he was part English father or something like that.
Yeah, I know.
Like, what are you going on about? He at least knows Malaysian and Singaporean stuff. Whereas Simu Liu, who was not born in Canada, but he raised in Canada, what does he know about Malaysian or Singaporean people?
But that's what I mean. This is why it's a world I don't want to get involved in many ways. I don't like it. It doesn't appeal to me, and I just don't like it. It's like I worked out at one point that a lot of my acting roles, 85% of them, someone could say, well, he's not right for that. He's not Chinese enough. He's not white enough. He's not Korean enough. He's not Vietnamese. Someone could say that. And that's why it's not a world I particularly want to embrace, really. I'd rather kind of work in the theatre and create my own stuff, because as a broad minority diaspora in the West, this is, we're very, very hyper critical about, we'll get on about things like that, and we'll get on.
What's the point? I would say, I would be so thrilled if we got something like EastEnders, although still doesn't have a Chinese family in it, like going to the doctors and they have an Southeast Asian receptionist or a Southeast Asian receptionist who's also a wheelchair user. The sort of building up of all this so it becomes commonplace. So you don't have to sort of say, have to be a wheelchair user or have to be a disabled person. But somebody who can build up a portfolio of having done those things, and not just in Harry Potter, or something like that. Anyway, thank you so much
No,
for
thank you.
coming.
Thank
and
you.
I
It's
think
very
we
interesting.
went way over